David, tell us a little bit about Planet. Some of our listeners may not have heard about it, but you've got a big footprint around the country and you're very important, certainly to the tourism economy.
Yeah, Planet's a fantastic Irish success story. Owen. We started in 1985, based out of Galway, and the service started with our company providing VAT refunds for non-EU tourists who were visiting the Irish market. And why I say it's a great Irish success story is once we established the business in Galway and for Ireland, we then expanded into the Eurozone region. And in fact, we were the first company to go into the French market, for example, to provide this service. Since 1985, we've expanded into 65 countries around the world. And one of the things, as a Galwegian, one of the things that I'm very proud about the company is that all major innovations in the space worldwide, in terms of how the service is operated, both with customs, with governments, and particularly with retailers, all those innovations have been designed and implemented by our R&D team in Galway. So when you look at integrating our services into till systems, acquiring systems, developing digital tax-free services, as we launched in the UAE 2 years ago, and radically pivoted tax-free into offering a completely more comprehensive service to the end user, the tourist visitor. It's been a phenomenal success story for the business, and the Irish business has always been central to that growth.
Tell us how much have the Irish operations grown, say from the mid 80s, which is 35 years ago, to now?
Yeah, I think at the start, there was 3 or 4 people that would have been based out of an office in Spiddal. And today we have around 250 people in Newcastle, in Galway City, who provide mainly group support functions. So their finance, their technical, their IT, their development, their a range of different kind of group roles supporting business innovation and business development all over the world. Secondly, I suppose there's my team in Dublin, and my team in Dublin, we've around 30 people altogether, and we manage the overall Irish business and the support infrastructure in both Shannon and Dublin airports. So it's gone from a very, very small team to a very, very big team. It's gone from a team focused on Ireland to a team focused on the world.
And from an Irish tourism perspective, we obviously kind of think of ourselves in terms of scenery or culture or built heritage, but in fact, our retail offering is very powerful, and there's an awful lot of visitors from international markets who come here and benefit from the shopping experience and get their tax back, which is a real plus.
Yeah, and tax-free is one of the key services that we offer. I mean, in keeping with our small open economy strategy that our government has always had, our tax-free solution has always been quite similar as well. Ireland has always had one of the most accessible schemes for tourists visiting, but the business originally would have been very manual. The tax-free service would have been a very manual, administratively heavy process. And one of the things that we did do as volume grew was automate the process. So we would have integrated our service at point of sale. We would have digitalized the solution to a significant extent. And as the service has grown from principally Americans to very significantly now Chinese and Middle Eastern customers, the kind of service has developed accordingly. And tax-free has become a much more prominent service that it's established, tourists expect it. It's critically speaking, I suppose, it's a European-wide initiative. All countries in Europe have it, and in some respects, we all compete against each other to grab as much tourist spend as we can. Our key focus is trying to work with our retail partners to make sure that they are as in tune to how the service is meant to offer, so that when tourists come in, they can use that capability to encourage people to spend in store.
And you mentioned retail partners, and you mentioned having quite a few of them along the Wild Atlantic Way. How many of those do you have within Ireland at the moment?
I'd say Planet probably represents around 65% of the retail estate in Ireland. We, as an international business, we would manage a lot of the international retail, but obviously a lot of the kind of domestic souvenir business have been long-standing partners of ours.
Yeah, the pandemic obviously has caused great angst this year, but there's another issue I think that you're very aware of and you're very conscious of. It's a proposed change to what's called the retail export scheme. Can you tell listeners and viewers a little bit more about that?
Yeah, the pandemic has wiped our industry out, similar to many other people, and we're looking at approximately 98% drop in volume currently. The retail export scheme, in essence, allows non-EU residents who visit Ireland on holiday, who buy goods and take them home with them, to claim back the VAT element of those sales. And I suppose what we're seeing at the moment are expats who are home visiting family members using the system to an extent. But traditionally speaking, it's largely Americans who would benefit from the system. And you're talking about probably in the region of 800,000 tourists a year from the States, for example, would benefit from tax-free savings. Yeah. The challenge that's come to the fore more recently is Brexit related. So it's a shame that something outside of our jurisdiction is this particular issue. Through no fault of the retail community or the tourism community. The issue is essentially that the government is looking for alignment between the UK and Ireland post-Brexit. And the government was concerned that post-Brexit, as the UK becomes a third country, and in essence they become a non-EU country, and British people can travel to Ireland and shop tax-free. So the Irish government were concerned that because travel between the UK and Ireland is so voluminous, that accordingly, as British people come here, they would all shop tax-free, they would all take that VAT home with them. And because there's so much volume of UK traffic, that there could be a potential for the scheme to be undermined from a compliance perspective. And that's hugely disappointing for us to hear, because the decision was made last year without any consultation to us as the people who provide the service. And as we understand it, without any consultation to the compliance industry, the tourism industry, or the retail industry. Now, we understand the concern, but it's very quick to look at it and understand that the steps that have been taken have been misplaced. What the government sought to do to restrict UK traffic using the retail export scheme was to do two things, essentially. One was infrastructural. The way use was tax-free happens at the moment is an American customer, for example, will shop in store, they'll be identified as eligible for tax-free, and they'll be issued with an application for the reclaim of that VAT. They then need to complete that form, and when they're leaving the airport, as they're walking toward their flight in the departures lounge, they can visit our office on their way to the departures lounge, and our staff will assess and evaluate the claim. There's some compliance checks that we'll oversee, but very quickly and simply, their submission will be reviewed, submitted to us, and we'll evaluate it and then pass it on to customs for final evaluation and sign off. The process for UK travelers was they would bypass that. They would travel home, they would arrive maybe in Leeds Airport, they would have to go through the red channel, identify themselves as consumers wishing to declare the VAT and the import duty on the particular product. They would have to request the border force official to evaluate the goods, to confirm what the import duty and VAT is, pay that, obtain payment of that, obtain proof of importation for those goods. And then once that is done, the form could be resubmitted back to us, and the associated VAT could be paid. Now, from our perspective, when you look at the Fáilte Ireland data, the average British person to Ireland spends €30 per person per trip on retail. So the average refund is €3 or €4. So no one is going to go through that process for that amount of money. So it's an understandable reaction that the government had, but when you break it down, the likelihood is that particular measure will stop UK tourists using the scheme. The second measure that the government sought to do was, in case any proportion of British people sought to use the scheme regardless, the one other measure that the government had in their armory was to raise the level of spend that was permissible within the scheme from €0, which it is today, to €175. Now, that'll have a very, very small impact on British people because in the main, they're spending well below that threshold and it's not worth their while to complete the process. So it won't really impact British tourists in any capacity, but what it does do is it has a massive impact on American tourists and Canadian tourists. And the data that we had a report commissioned by Jim Power, and it shows that 81% of visitors to the island today who benefit from the scheme today, and you're talking about probably in the region of 800,000+ tourists who use the system, all of those people are now going to no longer be able to use tax-free because of a measure to address British tourists. And to us, that's really, really regretful. That to us means effectively the price of goods for tourists visiting Ireland next year below 175 will increase by 23%. So retailers who are struggling to trade out of this particular downturn are now faced with this additional whammy next year if the commencement order is signed by the Minister for Finance to actually affect these rules. So this is devastating. There's no two ways around it. It's absolutely devastating, and particularly to the Wild Atlantic Way. And we've been making this point to government thus far. You have a government strategy to promote the Wild Atlantic Way, and you have a government strategy in complete conflict with that. And we've done the assessment by accounts to see, and we've spoken to most of our retailers at this stage to give them an indication. Some of the biggest tourism locations in the country, 95% of the retail business they do to tourists, to non-EU tourists today, is below the 175 value. So you have retailers basically saying all of the spend is at risk. You're talking about in excess of 40 million in retail spend that effectively may not ever happen again.
And Ireland is doing that, or proposing to do that, unwisely in our view. How are other European nations who are, if you like, similarly affected by Brexit, because equally they could, get an influx of UK visitors claiming VAT back? What's the Portuguese and the French and the Germans? Are they taking a different tack, or are they doing something similar?
I think that's probably a really, really important point. No other country is doing this. No other.
So at the stroke of a pen, Ireland is being put at a competitive disadvantage.
It's that, and it's worse than that. The French, so as I mentioned earlier on, the scheme has to be made available from €175 and above. And today, only one country in Europe has that limit, and that's France. And as we all know, France gets, in a normal year, they'll get 1 million Chinese visitors who decamp on the Champs-Élysées, and they spend large amounts of money in some of the world's biggest brands. In Ireland, our mix of tourism is completely different to that. But despite that, the French have actually announced that from the 1st of January, their limit will go from 175 to 100. The Spanish, who receive around 18, I think it is, plus million UK tourists a year, last year removed their threshold, so they're now down at 0. So the take from the French, from the Spanish, from all other jurisdictions, the Maltese have reduced their levels, their restrictions. The Cypriots have reduced their levels. The Portuguese have been on the front foot in terms of how they can promote this. And I was actually just on a call 20 minutes ago with one of my colleagues who runs our business in Portugal, and they're down in the Algarve all of next week with the profile, educating retailers in that part of Portugal. When the UK visitors come, how they come, what flights do they come on, where do they stay, where do they spend? And it's most frustrating for a business like ours. We understand and we see the challenges that this will bring, as well as the retail businesses that will be affected by it. And it's immensely frustrating. As far as we understand it, no research was ever conducted into the impact. We've conducted our own study and presented it, and thus far, we're not aware of any follow-up from the government. So it's something that we're very engaged with government on. As I said it toward the start, we appreciate the concern. It's not wrong to have a concern like this, but it's critical that the concerns you have are evaluated, and that they're evaluated with the people who are at the coalface, the retail community, the tourism community, and the tax refund community. And I think if you delve into the data, very quickly you'll find the issue isn't as pronounced. So what we're hoping for is, at the very least, the most critical thing is that the threshold spend isn't changed in Ireland in 2021.
In other words, that commencement order, I think you referred to it as, it's effectively not put into effect. I mean, should government, or should the Minister for Finance not be sort of saying, let's leave it a year, 2 years, 3 years, let's see what the impact of Britain exiting the EU is on this scheme, and then let's look at it in the round.
And I think COVID provides that opportunity. There are no UK residents visiting here. So the concerns around volume visitation and VAT displacement no longer exist. And furthermore, the Americans aren't visiting, so no one is using the scheme. And I think that's perfectly plausible and logical, and that is what we're asking, that you certainly don't implement the top line measure, the change on the threshold, because immediately that'll impact Americans, Canadians, Chinese, Middle Eastern customers. in respects, I'm reluctant to even, it's a shame to be suggesting that on the basis that all other European states are saying this is an opportunity to help our economy recover. But we're trying to be cognizant of the government's position and saying, fine, if you have a legitimate concern, we're here to help. We're here to see what we can do to support that initiative. And if it means that the initial infrastructural changes to UK residents are implemented, fine, we'll support that, and we'll work with customs, and we'll try and understand the usage of the scheme. We'll report back to you as a community of retailers within the island. And if there are fears, let's work out how we can understand how much of a threat this does represent, if any, which we think it doesn't. But at least then we can work with government to understand what measures can be taken to address it properly. But critically, I think the thing is we're offering to help research the perceived issue and
absolutely,
help find a way out of it.
And the great thing is the research is real data. It's real transaction data. So it's not like it's sort of surveys or anything. It's actually it'll be there in hard numbers.
You're right. I mean, there's a couple of businesses in our space in Ireland, and we've actually worked with Jim Power, the economist Jim Power, to pull together a report that actually profiles by country the impact. And again, he's come with a figure of 7 million in VAT displacement that British tourists would actually create in Ireland. Now, British tourists, when they come here, the preliminary data from Fáilte Ireland shows that they spent €1 billion in Ireland. Million in VAT. So the refundable VAT potentially associated with that 1 billion in spend, according to the report that was commissioned, is 7 million.
Yeah, as you say, retail and tourism industry on its knees this year, and the idea of voluntarily making a change that would further disadvantage it and put it at a competitive disadvantage to other nations just seems nonsensical.
Yeah, it is, and I know some of the concerns that came up originally were about Northern Ireland and how would the tourist refund scheme adapt to the residents from Northern Ireland. And I suppose it's a really important point to note that Northern Ireland is it's deemed a common travel area between the north and the south. So Northern Ireland residents aren't able to shop in this particular scheme. So this is about how can we attract and how can we benefit from these people who are coming. We have a unique cultural link with the UK. We have a unique friends and relatives connection with the UK, more so than probably most other countries in Europe. And I think to harness that and to benefit from that would be phenomenal.
Well, David, listen, I know the next few weeks and the next couple of months will be very intense. So best of luck with the campaign, and ITIC will certainly be supporting you.
Thanks very much, Owen, and I appreciate your support, everything that you've helped us with so far.